So, hello and welcome to Intuitive Connection. I'm your host, intuitive counselor and spiritual guide, Victoria Shaw. And today I am super duper excited because I am welcoming back one of my favorite people and guests and mentors and human beings, Karen Garvey, to share a little bit about her perspective on the awakening process and some other things that I've heard her say that I wanted more clarification on. And so, I invited her back to provide that to me and to all of you. So, Karen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
For listeners that haven't been following the show for a while, maybe haven't tuned into your other numerous appearances on the show, can you share a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you work in your journey before we get this party fully started?
Yeah, sure. I have an MBA and had a relatively predictable career path in business. I also came from a rough and tumble childhood, so I came into adulthood not knowing how to be happy. But I remember putting it out there in my head that I was going to learn how to be happy because I learned everything else successfully that I wanted to. And my course changed on 9/11 when I simultaneously experienced the attack on the World Trade Center while I was an hour away physically. So it opened me up to the idea that consciousness is not connected to the body. And very long story short, it set me on a path of understanding consciousness, the nature of our journey here, and how to communicate with non-physical sources, and so on. And that's basically the space I've stayed in ever since.
That's beautiful. And listeners who also don't know, Karen was one of my very first teachers and continues to be an important person in my life. And I always really welcome her wisdom and perspective on things. She is really, truly a tuned in and tapped in individual. And I'm so grateful to get to, walk on this planet with you, my friend. Um, and the awakening journey, is that the verbiage you would use? Because I know one of the things that I love about you is you're very careful with your wording.
I like the awakening journey. I like the word enlightenment. I think they're all good. I say time and time again that the English language lacks the depth of spiritual conversation that other languages have. Especially, places when you go to, the region of Switzerland or actually Sweden, Norway, Finland and Japan, their language is so rich with things that we feel and we know conceptually, but we don't have the words for them.
Wow. I never knew that. I don't speak any of those languages. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, some of them become typical in our language, even. Like you'll use the term, it's not a word, but you'll use the term feng shui, right? So feng shui is a derivative of a manner in seeing something conceptually, spiritually in Japan, that we don't use that language unless we adopt it from them. But there are lots of words like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, awakening is a word that we can agree on. Enlightenment is a word we can agree on. And I feel that consciousness raising, consciousness expanding, I'm thinking probably would fall into that category. And I think a lot of people that follow this show, follow your teachings, follow my teachings, what they're really looking for is, they want to be on that journey. They want to. I think about it as spiritual alignment, right? How do we live more from that soul based lens and that soulful alignment, rather than all of the things that we learned as human beings that take us away from that? I want to know what that process looks like to you and how you understand it. And then I also want to chat about something that I heard you say that I still haven't totally wrapped my brain around, the idea that you think that the awakening process is unidirectional, meaning you go in one direction and there's no turning back.
Mhm.
And that doesn't always jibe with my experience watching externally other people and their behavior. So I'm curious about that, and I think other people will
Right.
be curious about that too.
The way that I see it, and this comes from spending a lot of time with my consciousness in the space that we all reside when we're not in the physical, and actually while we're in the physical. I just term it the energy realm for simplification. And in the energy realm, we are fully evolved, pure souls. And at birth, we are the same. The way that we are experiencing life around us from birth on will determine how much of our soulful wisdom we can stay connected to. So the more abuse, neglect, misinformation, um, control issues by other people, the more we experience that in our childhoods, the more likely it is that we're going to be severing the connection to our inner wisdom and our truth. I almost see it like, I like to visualize it as like a fiber optic cable. So, it's just strands that carry light that's wrapped up in a cable. And when you look at mathematically the amount of information that can transport through those cables, that's pretty much what it's like for us. And little by little, as we experience things that are very, very unfavorable, those light waves kind of get cut. And our goal is to try to restore them. That's the process of awakening as I see it.
That was a lot of beautifulness in there. And I never really saw it. First of all, it's a beautiful image, and I can really see that. I think a lot of people think about awakening as this sort of extra human experience, right? I have to go become a super conscious human, and moving away from that. And what I hear you saying is it's really about a restoration process. It's about using the experiences that you've had that, as a human, that maybe caused you to forget aspects of your soulful nature and reconnect those aspects back again. And that's the whole deal.
Yeah, it's semi-true. It's interesting because I always tend to get circles from our guides as models, and it's so interesting that you have that big circle behind you of flower. I have the big circles in front of me as my backdrop, but I want to I'm going to model it on this. I just find that interesting that we both have that. But if you look at the one of these circles, it can be metaphorically representative of the soul. So at any given moment, we have a certain vibrational energy, and that's the sphere of our vibration. So at birth, we're like stars in the sky. Every star has a different radiant energy, as do we. So when we are kind of separated from that shine in childhood and childhood trauma, it's like we get cloaks on. I call it masks and layers. So the size of the circle may wind up becoming like this inner circle instead of the outer one that we were born with. Okay. So then the process as an adult is as we start to recognize the way the dominoes of our youth fell down and the way that it profoundly affected us, and we want to return and restore the original vibration that we had, we go through the process of enlightenment, of, spiritual development, self-awareness, and so on. But at some point, we can, and the aim would be to reconnect with all that we knew and then even expand beyond the original radiant energy. So there's always room for growth. Okay. And this is a very simplistic model because enlightenment has tons and tons of layers and areas of achievement and different facets to it. So it's not like it's all one or all the other. It's expansion in the aggregate. Okay.
All right. You said so much in there. The first thing I want to share for listeners that are just listening to this audio, both Karen and I, you can't see it, but we both have flowers behind us. I have a beautiful sunflower, which Miss Garvey uh, communicated from my guides pretty much at the outset was going to be the brand logo for my brand. So this is about 15 years ago, my friend, you gave me that
Oh, wow.
411. Mm-hmm. And she has beautiful dandelion poofies behind her.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to let you guys know that so that those of you who
That's
can't
helpful.
see the
Thank you.
video have that experience. Well, one thing I was thinking as I heard you talking, I was thinking, that isn't part of that expansion process where we have the forgetting and the remembering. Doesn't that just
Yes.
naturally, isn't that what
Yeah.
the expansion is all about?
Yes. It's certainly for what is hidden from us because of our youth. It's recalling, it's returning to that state of consciousness and that all-knowingness of what we knew before we were born. By far, absolutely. But I also feel like we can make strides in a physical life where we can expand our radiant energy to a level that's greater than when we were born, in addition. Okay, so I do call the process of forgetting what we knew before we were born, I call it earth amnesia, but not recalling it helps us engage in the process of life. You gotta be in it to win it, right? You
Yeah.
gotta be a part of it to unfold it. So that's half of it. And honestly, being alive alone for a physical life, you're going to have some growth, period, even if you remain unable to shed the challenges of your past. But most people will return home without fully recovering this, but they still will have expansions on some realms. So it's basically a way to take in and integrate so that it becomes a part of our being, the growth and the knowledge and the wisdom, and then we radiate with that everlasting feeling and truth.
That's beautiful. And so, what I think I hear you saying is that we have growth no matter what, to some degree,
Yes.
just by
Landing there.
dancing the dance of being
Yep.
human.
Yeah.
And then some of us have that extra little boost where we start to really be able to bring some presence, some consciousness, some awareness to, some of the struggles we've had or some of the ways that we've been disconnected, and so that we can reconnect. And I'm guessing too, knowing you, it's not necessarily a retrospective journey. You don't necessarily have to do years of therapy to get there.
Oh,
It's,
no.
in fact,
No.
sometimes that can take you away from there.
Yes.
That said the therapist. um
Yes. Well said.
but what you're saying is that, as at least this is what I hear you saying, is that, and this is what I hear my guide saying, is as that we live the human dance with a greater degree of awareness and consciousness. That's the gift that keeps on giving, and more and more and more it will cause you and have the effect of you expanding your awareness, because as you bring more of yourself to the table, you get more back from the experience.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's basically a great metaphor for it is climbing a mountain. At certain elevations, you're going to see a certain percentage of the vista around you, and as you continue to ascend, you're going to be able to see more and more and more until you hit the pinnacle when you can see 360 degrees. It's basically the same kind of thing. As you elevate, as you ascend, you have a greater perspective about the earthly journey.
All right. And you can't climb down.
Okay, so we're going to segue into
Let's
that.
do it.
First of all, we would love to think that when we set our intention to, recalling who we are, that it would be just a meteoric journey from the bottom to the top, and it doesn't look like that. That's why we're here for a long time, hopefully. It's more sometimes we climb, sometimes we plateau, which means we feel stagnant for a considerable amount of time. Sometimes we feel like we go back down the mountain, and sometimes we ascend again. It's a lot more jagged. Just the same as a child's growth tends to be jagged. They're not growing in height or weight by, just micro moments. They sleep and eat a ton, and then all of a sudden, boom, right?
Right.
It's basically the same as that. What I even was careful to say is that the downward slides are feelings, because the wisdom that we attain at any moment becomes a part of our being and our repertoire. However, those feelings are competing with our self-identification, the community we were raised in, the masks and layers that we hold, our aspirations for belonging, or what we believe we're supposed to do or be, or how we're supposed to act or look, or what we're supposed to achieve. And sometimes those things are at odds with each other. So for our ease, we may need to drop back a little and adopt habits that were formerly more appreciated or approved by our community or within our own selected identity. And there's nothing wrong with that. If we look at history, there's very little advance in people breaking free from their heritage, from their cultures, from their clans, from their comfort zone. What a community does is provide us with so many different things that we feel like we are really reliant on, whether it's social, physical, intellectual, spiritual, emotional. It becomes our cushion. It becomes our childhood blanket that's kind of worn and torn. So it makes sense that as we rise and can see with clarity some of the indifference or lack of growth in the community around us, makes sense sometimes we'll just kind of slip right back to where we used to feel more valued and appreciated by that community. I like to illustrate this process with a story. I had a lot of things happen in my first 2 years with communicating with guides, almost like I was in some kind of an accelerated course. So instead of wasting decades figuring this all out, I'd get one good pop and I'd sort it all out quickly so I could move on to the things that weren't relevant to those discoveries. But I remember one time I was like walking through the den and the family was watching a show, and I wasn't much of a TV watcher per se, unless I was watching something with one of the kids. And there was it was like one of those news magazine shows. So the person's face was hidden and their voice was changed to conceal their identity. And that's compelling. Like, why is this person hiding and changing their voice? So I stood there for a minute and I watched. And the story was about a young man who was sharing with the audience and his interviewer that he was a diehard card carrying member of the KKK. And everything in his entire being, from family, school, religion, unity, everything was centered around that indoctrination into that belief system. So at one point, I don't remember the details of it, but he was drowning. And a black man came and saved his life. And they had, obviously, you saved my life. They had a huge bonding moment. I mean, they hugged, he was grateful, and, aha, this expansion happened. He then went back to his community and he, shared little by little. It's not there. Black people aren't so bad. And that didn't go well. Okay. Because it challenged the self-identification of a community that had built their whole sense of being in reality on that falsehood that one group is less than another. So eventually he had to escape and change his identity so that he could break free of the clan. And now here's the thing. It's almost comprehensible how a person in a similar situation to that could have the aha moment, but they could be terrified of letting go of every single thing they've known for since birth.
Right.
Everything since birth. How do you figure out life? How do you earn a living? How do you find someone to date? Where do you live? What do you tell people? How do you give out your last name? What do you
Right.
tell about your history? So it's almost comprehensible how someone could, even on an unconscious level, come back into adapting to that behavior. But the truth will always be shining bright. Always. You can't turn it back off. Okay?
I mean, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And I'm thinking about because you're using the example of a community, but you kind of mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, all of those conditioned patterns, all of those habits that we learned, all of those faux sense of self that we've come to identify with that don't really
Yes.
serve us, but feel comfortable because we've been, calling ourselves that for most of our
Yes.
lives. And
Yes.
I was in my group um Tuesday night, and one of the beautiful women is a therapist, and she said something that was so helpful. She's like, the youngest part of you is the oldest part of you. And I was like, that's really powerful. It makes sense. Meaning, when you were a child, those little things that you learned like early on are the ones that have been with you
Oh,
the longest,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And
Yes.
so it kind of makes sense, right? We're very used to
Yes.
them. They're our
Yes.
oldest friends,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Funny because I was just saying to someone today about how we can have signs and validation from the universe, and sometimes it just comes through the mouth of a child,
Yeah.
and maybe even the child doesn't fully comprehend what they said, but boom, unfiltered. Whoa,
Yes.
drop the mic.
Yes. And I was thinking that too. And she said it as well, because the youngest part of us is also often the wisest part of us when you go all the
Yep.
way in there before the party of the masculine layers got started.
Yeah. But yes, you're exactly right. You take the concept of community, identification within that, you also can apply it accurately to your self-identification. It's actually a little bit easier for us to see the community outside of us than it is for us to see the community we created within us. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And that's the internalized community too, because a lot of what we've come to identify ourselves as was an attempt to fit into the world and
Yes.
to gain acceptance from the people in the world. I find that a lot sometimes when I'm internally like trying to challenge not even trying to challenge a belief, but something comes up and I'm like, oh, what do other people think about that? And I'm like, wait, hold on, does that really matter? And then I breathe through it and usually recognize it does not. But I think that's how we were all raised, right? That's how this life thing works. Right.
Yeah.
We learn about
Yeah.
this consensual reality from other people, and we learn
Yes.
about who we are from what other people tell us. And so it can feel
Yes.
daunting we can feel if we unplug from that, we lose everything.
Yes. Yeah. And not to add any more weight to it, but in
Yeah.
addition, as we are finding ways to surmount the childhood difficulties, we develop defense mechanisms at a young age. And a defense mechanism that helps us to survive childhood is something that can go from being a buoy to an anchor in adulthood. So the thing that we're hanging our hat in that saved our lives, even potentially, could be the thing that sinks us later on because it's no longer relevant when we hit a moment of growth where we surpass that need. Okay. So like I know that before I had all of these experiences, the thing that I hung my hat on was that teachers in elementary school and beyond, they highlighted me. So it made me feel intelligent and worthy. And in a lot of ways, it made me feel more worthy. But that compensated and balanced for the lack of what I got of that feeling at home. So it was important to me to strive to be valued for my intelligence as an adult, but to the point that I didn't find as a young adult, I wasn't very accepting of uneducated people. I wasn't very accepting of people that didn't know there, and there. And that's where it became a hindrance because I couldn't experience growth if I was judgmental in the realm in which I experienced my defense mechanism.
I'm laughing because I learned the difference between those words when I was a graduate student at Princeton. So I'm like smart, not smart in your estimation.
Yeah.
No, no, but
Thankfully, I'm not like that anymore.
it's all right. I can take it now. Back then, I was just like, oh my God, I didn't know that. I'm glad no one figured me out. But no, I think that's a beautiful example of how this process works and how, we oftentimes too are not judging others. We're holding ourselves. And I know I'm pretty sure you would say, I think that all judgment is ultimately self-judgment anyway. And so when you're projecting it
Yeah.
out there, it's because something in you doesn't feel good to begin with.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, interestingly, judgment can work in the opposite as well. It's based on comparison. If you need to feel unworthy at the moment, you're going to see yourself as less than in that arena. And if you need a moment of feeling more than, you'll judge yourself as more complete than a different person.
Yeah. And neither one is needed.
No, no.
All right, so let's talk for a minute. So I understand this now. And I think what I hear you saying is that we can sometimes move back to more comfortable patterns. But what's been gained in those moments of expanded awareness, even if we're not living it 24/7, it won't go away. And when we cross
Yes,
over, that those glimmers and glimpses that we had will carry over with us into the next body, into the next experience, or
yes,
whatever we're doing on the other side. And I hear the guide saying oftentimes too, we learn in fits and starts. So you're expanding and then you're diving back in to explore more, and it's all getting
yes,
integrated. So again, it's a forward momentum even when it doesn't present that way from the human lens.
yes, yes. And I also sense that when we do have an aha moment and a truth that turns its light back on, if we don't live consistently with it, there's a nagging feeling inside, even if we push it down and deny it. So, just if you think about it, like if someone is in love with someone outside of the religion of the family and they opt to stay socialized with their family's religion and break off the relationship, there's going to be something inside of them that kind of says, why can't I be strong enough to choose love and to bring this into my family and help them expand?
Karen, that's huge. That's huge. That's like a light bulb moment for me, because what I hear you saying is that as the awareness expands, things that used to feel comfortable for us are going to not feel comfortable anymore. We may keep going back there, but they're going to feel
Yes.
increasingly misaligned. I mean, that explains so
Yes.
much. That explains what I often see in people's personal journeys, where before it's like, okay, so I grew up in the house of smokers, right? And one of my parents quit smoking and one of my parents did not. And the one that quit smoking after many, many years didn't like the smell of smoke anymore. Right.
Hmm.
And even for me, I went back. I haven't been in a smoking household, since I was 18. And I went back after my mom passed away to visit her smoking household. And I could not breathe the air, right? Because I'm not used to it anymore. The difference
Yes.
between the air I am
Yes.
used to breathing and the air that I grew up breathing. I mean, it's metaphorical as well as actual physical, right? It's a huge stretch, right? So it bothers me more now
Yes.
than it would have bothered me,
It's a
50,
great analogy.
56 years ago.
Fantastic analogy.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing that that is part of what drives the enlightening process, but also why it sometimes seems things are getting worse before they get better.
That's very true. Very true. We sometimes will find that as we have big aha moments that we integrate or recall, we we see areas in which we'll get pushed back from our loved ones and our circle of influence and friends. And we have to figure out a direction of what we are willing to accept and what we're not willing to accept. So sometimes the universe in its grace will help us to kind of detach from some relationships that are so separate from where we're now living. But sometimes making the push for it is a little bit more difficult, or there are people in our lives that we want to keep in our lives for the bigger picture. And we want to learn how to manage the feelings of their being somewhere that we have expanded beyond.
So what I'm mindful of time, even though I want to talk to you forever. Um, what listeners who are now thinking about this and they're thinking, look, I identify with being on awakening journey and I see like the light at the end of the tunnel, or I see like the expansion or all the things, but sometimes it feels so hard. And I want to understand kind of what's holding me back around that, or I want to know how to deal with this. Um, what would you say to them?
I think it's sometimes we just have to we may have to make peace with how we feel. We have to make peace with the choices that we make. And we also are living within a world where people's growth is not going to necessarily parallel ours. And it's okay to adapt behaviors that help them to feel comfortable in our presence, even if we're not as happy in their presence as we used to be. It's perfectly okay. Honestly, when we realize that this journey in the physical is an illusion, then we know we're actors in our own play or movie or novel. So if you're taking an acting role knowingly within the acting role of being human, and you act as if with certain people that you want to keep in your circle, it's perfectly okay. The only difference between you and the person you're connecting with is that you're an actor in this role. They don't know that they're an actor in the role. They believe it.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And I also think, but I'm going to get some clarification on this. it's it's not about that you have to pretend to be someone that you're
No,
not. And
no.
it's not that you should always acquiesce to the other person where they're at. It's about understanding that when you know truly and completely who you really are and you're anchored into that and you let all your choices come from there, occasionally a choice may be to make somebody else comfortable because that's easy for you.
Yeah,
It's not about dimming your light
no.
because other people, can't tolerate it yet, or not. It's about, acting from your light, and allowing that, without the need to change anybody else, be your guiding
Yes.
force.
Yeah, valuing where they are. They
Right.
are where they are. I'm sure
Right.
people in our lives have valued where we were at certain moments, right?
Right.
It's valuing where they are without feeling compelled to change them.
And one of the biggest things that I've learned through my human journey, especially I would say in the last like 5 to 7 years, is the importance of anchoring in what feels right and true to me and my perspective, and honoring it, not taking it super seriously. Sometimes, we want to be questionable about our very own perspective, but honoring what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, what feels right, true, and good to me, without having the need to worry about if someone else has a different opinion or a different way of viewing things, including a different way of viewing me. Like, I've
Yeah.
learned to say, you get to have your perception of the situation, myself included, because it doesn't have anything to do with me, and I honor that. Now, if your view of me makes you want to hit me in the face, I'm not going to associate with you, and I'm going to lock the door. But
Right.
I'm not really very afraid of that. It doesn't happen very often
No, it doesn't.
anymore, because by allowing myself to be who I am and have my own perspective, and allowing you to have yours, it actually creates more harmony.
Yes. Yep, it does.
And I
Yeah.
think too, more freedom for growth, right? Because we're not feeling like we have to convince the world to come along with us.
Yes. Yes. I like the word that I use often. I use the word invite. You can invite people in literally, figuratively, by modeling, whatever. You can invite. And if they don't bite at the invite, then just let them be.
Yeah, for sure. And I always get your truth is for you alone. And it's probably it probably is the most valuable thing that you have to connect with. All
Yep.
right. I'm going to ask you another general question. Are you ready?
Sure.
What are your parting words on the enlightenment awakening process? What did we not get to yet that you want people to know?
It's worth the effort. It's worth the consistency, because the greatest benefit of all is that you will become happier, more abundant, more creative, more playful, more the true essence of who you are by nature.
And and you kind of just said it, but I'm going to ask it again because that was so beautiful. What does the awakening experience feel like for you? Like, how has your life changed and continue to change, and your clients' lives continue to change through doing the work that you do?
In the 2 years when I was really putting tons of effort into it, and like most people, experiencing a ton of doubt because I didn't have an intellectual frame of reference for any of this at all. So I was in the doubt phase a lot. I would wake up not knowing, and I would go to bed knowing. I would wake up not knowing, and I would go to bed knowing. And I was living a perpetual Groundhog Day, the movie. And I will tell you that it was agony and ecstasy. My highs were higher and my lows were lower. So eventually it balanced out and I'm no longer disconnected per se. So I feel more happiness and joy and potentiality for both than a lot of people that I know. And that's a great feeling.
That's beautiful. All right, Karen, thank you so much for giving your time to have this conversation with me. I know so many people are going to benefit. I know I'm going to benefit. And also, it was really fun, which is the driving force of
Yeah,
all
it
that
is
I
so
do.
fun. It's
And
definitely fun.
I know listeners feel that too. I also know that listeners are going to want to know about more about you, your offerings, how to find you, and where to find you. So can you share a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Most of what I do you can find on KarenGarvey.com. And I have an events page there. My books are there. I have a blog there. I have a YouTube channel as well, which is Karen L. Garvey. And the easiest way to reach me is Karen@KarenGarvey.com, which is my email. Uh,
Yay.
yeah, and I love to help people become happier. That's the bottom line.
And you have an online course too for that as well, right?
Right now, I'm doing it more in person than
Ah,
online, only because I find that the upkeep with today's apps is actually pretty strenuous technologically. So I have printouts of workbooks that I use with people. I have some coaches for that program, and we do it that way instead rather than
Ah.
maintain that level that technology has come to 10 years later after I started it.
Got it. All right. So she has a happiness class that you can access. I know Karen is amazing for one-to-one readings and coaching sessions. She teaches widely, and I've experienced her. She does retreats. So she has books. So check all of that out on the website. You're gonna want to. And Karen, thank you again for joining us today, for being in my world, for being in the world. You are a gift, and very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure. It's always fun. I mean, we have a good time when we chat.
For
So
sure.
thank you.
And listeners, thank you guys all for tuning in, because of you, I get to do this and I like to do this. And I hope you're having as much fun as I am on the other side of, well, I always say the other side of the microphone, but I guess the speaker, the headphones, I don't know. But so grateful to each and every one of you, and namaste.